This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the first week of May 2014. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. We are joined by the familiar panel, all of us back from Baltimore, Maryland for UFC 172, and there are no shortage of things to discuss coming off of that event, of course, headlined by Jon Jones defeating Glover Teixeira and retaining his UFC light heavyweight title. But before we get into our usual business, let me tell you that today's episode of the MMA Beat is being brought to you by the good folks over at Glory Kickboxing. And Glory is back this Saturday on Spike TV, 9 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. They've got a great night of fights. It's Glory 16 Denver, and it is headlined in many ways by a one-night, four-man heavyweight tournament. For the best kickboxers in the world will be going toe-to-toe, having to fight twice in one night, and is also headlined by a welterweight title fight and the Glory debut of former UFC fighter Pat Barry. He is making his Glory debut on Saturday night. Should be a great night of fights. It's this Saturday on Spike TV, 9 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. in the West. All right, we got that out of the way. Thank you very much to Glory for their support. This is Luke Thomas. That's Jeff Wagenheim. That's Chuck Mindenhall. By now you know where they're from. Do I need to remind the people? They know. Guys, let's talk about UFC 172. Jon Jones, I remember you saying to me, Luke Thomas, after the fight, that he enjoyed being loved that night. Did the little Ray Lewis shimmy. The crowd was eating it up. His family was there. He had a great performance, and he was just in such a good mood after the fight, right at the post-fight press conference. Since then, he's very confusing because it's almost like he's, I hate to use this word, trolling us. He's putting out videos. He's making fun of legends. He's making fun of Phil Davis. What is going on with Jon Jones? Is this really, his grandmaster plan? Does he want to confuse us? Sometimes we should like him, sometimes we should hate him, or is he making a really big mistake here because he left Saturday night as a fairly lovable guy?
I don't know how much of this is strategic. I feel this is very impulse-driven, which is why that Instagram video where he mocked people who had cried about the fingers in the eyes, he deleted it quickly. He did leave the other stuff, the one about you mad bro to Chuck Liddell, which I thought was kind of funny actually. Yeah. And there was a couple other ones too, I think. He also put one that was sort of non-confrontational about the crank, and he put it next to pictures of that in the Gracie book. So it's run the gamut, but it seems to me all very impulse-driven, although the Phil Davis one was actually really good too. Anyway, here's the point being, I don't know how much in advance he's thinking about these things. I think he is very much enjoying the way he feels. I feel like he believes he's entitled to push back a little bit. I would love to, if you spend 15 minutes reading the Johnny Bones during a fight night when it's competing. I mean, it's quite a volatile experience. So, strategic or not, making a bad move, I don't know. I just feel like he feels he is on a high. He looked good. He performed well. Dave Meltzer saying it might be one of the more sold pay-per-views of the year so far. Wow. Yeah. So in all indications, or just this is Johnny Bones doing what he wants to do. In the end, I think it's a reflection of his growth as a young man, 26 years old. This is who he is now. This may not be who he is in a year or 2 years' time, but this is the sort of molting process, and this is what you're going to get.
You know what bothers me the most about all this? It's not the posts, it's not the mocking the fans. It's that he deletes them after posting them. Own it. This is how you feel. This is what you want to say to the people. This is how you want to interact with them. Just own it. Why are you always deleting things after you're posting them?
If you delete it, though, doesn't that mean it goes away, then nobody knows about it?
Yeah, it's a very ephemeral place.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's two Jon Joneses. There's the online Jon Jones, and I'm not speaking just about what comes out of his Twitter feed, but also what comes out about him. There's a lot more hate online. But if you were in the building on Saturday night, that was a love fest, and it was not just, there wasn't a lot of booing. It was hardly any booing. I didn't even hear it. It was just people were in love with the guy, and I wouldn't doubt that if by some chance he were fighting again this weekend in another building, the same thing would happen. He would still be loved in the building. There's something about being at a Jon Jones fight that it is transcending all the other stuff. I mean, when he was walking out, doing this little Ray Lewis thing and coming out, and you could see him pumped, and he's just looking around at the fans. I mean, the building is electric, and online it's a whole different thing. Online is a place where people can complain and he can do kind of weird stuff, and so it's almost like there's two different Jon Joneses. I mean,
which is pretty much where we were when we came into the whole thing. I mean, I feel like we're still talking about Jon Jones. Like, who's Jon Jones? What is he gonna?
Right.
I remember I wrote a column actually before going into this fight, like, who's really Jon Jones?
Cheap plug.
You guys should read it now. But that's still sort of the question is like, who's Jon Jones? He does these type of things. It's almost like he discovers Instagram or something and he wants to just try it out and answer his people and whatever. It's like you were saying, Luke. It's one of those things. You do see the amount of hate and the amount of criticism he gets, and at some point he's probably I know we've seen him sort of go through like some hardships with that. Like didn't know how to deal with it, and then he started to say he embraced it. We didn't fully believe him that he was embracing it either. I still feel like we're sort of there, but he's starting to find some levity. I think he's finding more levity in it, and he's. I agree with you 100% that he should just own it, because to me, even if they are a little childish, immature, whatever you want to call it, if it's a true reflection of Jon Jones, even if it's his impulses, to me it's sort of like, well, at least we're starting to get some light on Jon Jones and we get to see him be who he is. And to me, that's like still what's more important than anything that's going on.
Sorry, I think it's a bit of a lazy narrative though. Like, who is Jon Jones? I don't know. Does he even know who he is? Do his family might have a better idea than we do? But like, when you were a 26-year-old man, did you really fully know who you are? I'm 34. I don't know who I am. I mean, I have some idea, but am I who I want to be? No. I'm like, who is it? Whitman?
But you weren't trying to be. You weren't presenting yourself one way and then presenting yourself another.
Is that true? I don't know that that's true. I was also one not under a microscope, an intense microscope. Who is it? Whitman? I am many. I contain multitudes. Like it's not crazy to have a compartmentalized identity and sort of shape Jon Jones that way. Is he sometimes a pious Christian? Maybe. Is he sometimes a 26-year-old party animal? Maybe. Is he sometimes a jerk? Maybe. Is he sometimes what a 26-year-old guy would do on Instagram? Maybe all those things are true.
Right.
But I don't know that any of them are false. So it's hard to get you have to get a composite sketch of the guy, and it leans one way and the other. But it's a bit lazy to say, well, this is the real Jon Jones.
Well, I mean, absolutely. But when you are going on, you say things like, I'm going to be a true champion. You're going, you say these declarations of who you are, and then you do something else. I mean, that's really the confusion. You can't be making a declaration that you're one thing and then show yourself the next. I mean, you can. Obviously, he's doing that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it comes off like you're furthering his loss of his identity. Like who is this guy? How does he think? That sort of thing. It's a lot more. I mean, he's obviously like accelerated into this space very fast. He became a young champion and he accelerated into that. I felt like he was sort of picking up the pieces of the go. It's just that these years later, I feel like he's still sort of figuring all that out.
He's also, we talk about the evolution of Jon Jones as a fighter. And last Saturday, we saw some of that where he was doing some stuff that he hadn't done before, which, every single time we go out and we see him fight, he adds a little bit more to his repertoire. So there's a clearer sort of forward motion of the evolution, but he only really needs to publicly represent that for 25 minutes in a fight. But the rest of the stuff, all the online stuff, I mean, we could talk about, a tweet this on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., and you could talk about an Instagram hit on a Wednesday night at midnight. 24/7. The online world exists 24/7, and so if you're a guy who is evolving as a person, as you talk about him evolving as a person, that's something that is you're bare for the entire public to see, and it doesn't just get contained to those 5 rounds of that fight, and you just have to live it all the time, and that's so we're seeing the growing pains. We're seeing we saw the growing. Maybe we see the growing pains of him as a fighter, but that's something that he can contain. The other stuff, man, that's just like that's more than anybody can contain.
And again, I think the leading it says a little something about you as well. If you're going to put it out there, if you're going to mark people.
Well, you're not sure who you are. You're not sure. We're asking the question, who is Jon Jones?
The leading it makes it into a bigger deal.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, I'm done trying to figure out who Jon Jones is and what all this stuff means. Like, it's like I feel like we're going through his trash at this point.
He's putting it out there for us to see.
I understand. Yes and no. I mean, he is and he isn't. But I just feel like it's like, what do we expect to learn by over-examining his Instagram stuff? That he's an immature 26-year-old guy? Oh my God, is the sky falling now? Like, I don't understand what the indictment's all about.
Because he sends mixed messages. And and that's fine. He can from now until eternity. But I think that if you're going to be the face of the UFC,
he's not going to be though.
Why not?
Come on.
Why not?
This is the Jon Jones story.
Is he the best fighter in the world?
Oh, I think so.
By far.
I think so. Yeah.
So how can he not be the face of the UFC?
Because I think he himself lives in a world, as best I can tell, where it's me against the world. I think he feels that way. As
He
good
could
as
still
he
be
is,
the face of the UFC.
I don't know. I think he feels like the UFC is part of the process, but not with the wind at his back. I don't think that's true.
Sometimes the UFC doesn't get to decide who is the face as well.
That's true, but they have a heavy hand in it.
Well,
they have a majority share in that one.
Yeah.
The face of the UFC might be that's the part of him that's deleting stuff. The part that's putting out is the 26-year-old who's trying to figure out, who he is, and he's just living the life of, like you said, there's a lot of 26-year-olds who probably write all kinds of crazy stuff online, but they're not famous. They're not, they don't have the spotlight like Jon Jones does. So if he wants to represent himself as a figure, as getting all the big endorsements, and he's going to be the guy who's going to represent and be the face of the sport, so then I don't think I really wanted to represent myself that way. Delete.
People nitpick whatever he does. And so let me ask you this question. It was a question that was asked to me earlier this week. Is Jon Jones a dirty fighter, or is he just a very creative fighter? Back in the day, in the early days of sports, the NBA had to adapt to Wilt Chamberlain. They increased the size of the key. They had to adapt to George Mikan, goaltending and whatnot. Should the sport of mixed martial arts adapt to him? Because he pushes the limits, right? The stuff he does with his hand. Is it really just the referees are not enforcing the rules, and he's essentially as dirty as they'll let him be? If they're not going to stop him, he can keep doing these things, and these things piss people off, and they nitpick, and they point to these things as why he's a bad guy. But at the end of the day, can you say Jon Jones is a dirty fighter, or just a really smart and creative fighter who knows how to adapt to the rules?
I'm not sure they're mutually exclusive. I'm no baseball historian, but Ty Cobb was not necessarily the cleanest player, also one of the greatest. I'm not sure you can divorce the two. So it may be part. I think that this is a solvable problem, a hugely solvable problem. And it's not an indictment about whether, I think Jon Jones is not alone in this way. I think guys might be prone to it. It's hard to discern. Is this intentional? Is this not intentional? You can perceive it either way, and you might be right, The reality is, though, like if you watch an HBO broadcast on boxing, they're very good about two things. One, letting you know exactly who the officiating crew is, what their experience is, if they're a judge or they've had some screwy decisions, and they show the guys in the main event backstage with the referee telling them, I'm looking for this. If you do this, there's no warning. It's an automatic, blah, blah, blah. They never really set that. So what Jon Jones does is when the fight starts, he sort of tests the limits, not of his fighter, but of what the ref's going to do. He just keeps going and going and going. Set the parameters on television, make everything above board before you start the action. And I think this whole issue goes away rather than inspecting whether or not this is some sort of character flaw as in Jon Jones.
Yeah, I think it's unfair to single out Jon Jones. It is the most recent example of somebody doing something that causes some kind of a hurt to another fighter with the poke in the eye, but other fighters do things that have not been sanctioned by refs. Look at was it Aldo's last offense when he grabs the cage when he's trying to he's chronically done.
A few ago, it was against Chad Mendes.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of fights where that happens, where a guy grabs a cage, and if it happens the first time, the referee might say something, but it prevented the takedown, and that could be a big deal. So every violation of every regulation, is that fighting dirty? I mean, is it different to grab the cage to seize an advantage as opposed to poking someone in the eye that actually causes an injury, as opposed to trying to kick somebody in the thigh but you miss and you get them in the groin? I mean, all those things could be perceived as dirty if you want to perceive them that way. But a referee has not just the ability but the charge to warn and then take a point away. If the other night Dan Miragliotta had taken a point away, that probably would have changed the strategy for Jones. I don't think he wants to get a second point taken away or risk being disqualified like it happened to him his only loss. So it is a referee thing. I mean, I don't think we need to change rules. The rules are there.
I think he's just really creative. I mean, when you really look back, I think that Jackson Winklejohn sort of have a guy that they can say, hey, we have this sort of freakish athlete who can do these amazing things in there. And he loves to, from his earliest times, he was freelance in there. He was doing a lot of the spinning stuff, suplexes, things like that. Things that you didn't see every day. But he was doing it with relative ease. I remember the Stephan Bonner one, just watching him do this stuff. But he's kind of expanded that as we went on. He's trying axe kicks in this last one. He's been doing that oblique kick for a long time. And that's another one that's sort of on the fence. When you talk to some referees, I remember talking to Doc Hamilton. He was talking about that oblique kick, sort of like how dangerous it really is if you connect and you buckle somebody's leg. He didn't like that. But he was pointing out Jon Jones. I think it was like maybe the Damian Maia fight. One of those fights, or not John. It was talking about Anderson Silva, I think, at the time. But Jon Jones has started to use that a lot in his thing. It is legal. Not too many people, use it effectively. He's able to do that. It's just, and he's, all that stuff that you see him doing. I feel like he's really creative. He wants to try these things, and he probably is sort of pushing. What is legal? What can I get by with? What's to my advantage? And he's one of those cerebral type of fighters, I think, who really brings all of that in there until somebody says otherwise. But ultimately, to me, it looked like, when he was using that, it was pretty intentional. It was like part of what maybe they had talked about. You see other guys in the past who use it on the ground, covering up, disrupting the breathing, things like that. To me, it just seemed like that was part of his game plan.
2 points. One, I'll wait right here. Somebody point to me a fight that Jon Jones won that can measurably be shown that came as a consequence of one of his opponents suffering injury from an eye poke. Let me know.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's not legal or illegal.
Sure, if he breaks the rule, it should be enforced.
Right.
But I'm sort of pointing, everyone's like he's a dirty fighter. I'm like, the record he has built, the eye pokes are unfortunate. If people want to warn and take points away, I'm perfectly okay with that. But that's not how he's winning. He's winning because he's beating guys, and he's beating them to damn near death. The second one, I want to, real quickly, the second one is, everyone's like, well, what about that arm crank? He didn't give Glover a chance to tap. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? When Frank Mir did it, he had Pete Williams in basically in guard, a form of guard, so that he could consistently apply, and it's a one full motion. Jones was just trying it out. He was just trying to crank, see if he could cause some damage, see if he could move him around, see how Glover would react. It's not the same kind of thing. The reality is, and you saw this a little bit with John Hackelman's response on Twitter to John, which is, when he was mocking Chuck Liddell, you mad bro, he goes, way to show some martial arts spirit. There's a certain unwritten code of martial arts here. Guys won't do the oblique kick. Guys won't do the shoulder crank. They want to win the fight, maybe even concuss you, but they don't want to do what they consider to be unfair forms of damage. Jon Jones is a prize fighter. Is it legal? Is it not legal? I'm going to do the legal things irrespective of any unwritten code of ethics.
So this sets up the big rematch between Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson, and I love the dynamic between both fighters. Jon Jones won't even say Gustafsson's name at the post-fight press conference.
Forgot about that.
Won't answer any questions about him. Gustafsson saying he's in Jon Jones's head, and he has his own kind of style of how he approaches all the talk about Jon Jones. And Dana White on Saturday night said that they are considering holding this fight in Sweden. Now, it's a good idea on paper, in my opinion. It's a good business idea to have it in a 50,000-seat stadium. Swedes going nuts. Everyone hates Jon Jones. Gustafsson gets to fight on his home turf. And you think it's a good idea. And I want to ask you why. Because I think that if Jon Jones doesn't want to go, and I have a pretty good feeling he doesn't want to fight there because he loves to be loved, right?
Yeah.
He shouldn't have to go. The UFC can't tell him to go there because he is the champion. He has done enough to earn the right to say no.
Do I really have to talk about this? Anderson Silva fought one time in Brazil. How long did he hold the belt? I mean, all I'm saying is, for him to have to go over and fight in Sweden, I don't understand what the big deal is. I understand, yes, his preferences would be to fight over here, because why wouldn't you? You'd want the fans to be on your side. But Anderson Silva fought one time for the belt in Brazil, and it was at UFC 134. So it's one of those situations where you're like, why should it be different for Jon Jones versus? I understand it's a North American.
Because Brazil wasn't quite the market that it is today, right?
But to me, it's like, since this thing is global, since we keep talking about it, we're globalizing this thing. I don't see the preferences. You go where the opportunity would be, right? Like, so if they're able to put on that fight, that's the biggest place they can put it on. To me, it might be. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they could probably do it in Toronto again, although they've taken Jones there 3 times, or a place like that. They could probably do big business. But since there's so much interest in the European market and up in Scandinavia, especially Sweden, obviously Gustafsson being who he is, there's a romantic side of me too that's just like, you know what, Jon Jones against all odds. A lot of people think he might be ducking Gustafsson a little bit, but what kind of comment would that be to be like, not only am I going to fight and do my rematch with this guy, but I will go into his backyard. To me, that's just like that sort of thing is sort of like a Rocky IV romanticism, that type of thing. But ultimately, I look at it like Jon Jones, confident he's going to do what he does, make the adjustments, and come in there. And to me, it wouldn't really matter where he's fighting, ultimately. So I look at it like the old, Ollie, or going into the Rumble in the Jungle, Thrilla Manila, all those type of things. I always liked that. I would like the idea of Chael Sonnen when they were going to put him in Brazil against Anderson. So to me, that was like, wow, one man against the world going in there. I like those scenarios. And Jon Jones, I'm like, he's one of those guys. A narrative like that might actually make a lot of sense for him. And him going over there and having to do it and to do what he did the first time more emphatically on Gustafsson home turf. I just like the idea of it.
I'm with you totally. I love the deck stacked against him. Not to say that he deserves that or anything like that. I think that he is a champ. That if they want to put it in Vegas or whatever, that's fine. But I love that narrative. I think that this was the first guy who's really challenged Jones. But what we saw of Jones last weekend made me feel like, well, if they get in there again, the Jon Jones I saw last Saturday is gonna wreck Gustafsson. I believe that just all things being equal, he's a better fighter. I feel like he had wrecked so many people that I think he just was caught off guard by Gustafsson that first time. I feel like he's the better guy. So how do we stack the deck a little bit more? Put it in Sweden. Put it right in downtown Stockholm. Put it in Gustafsson's backyard. I mean, that's just amazing. And you're talking, to your point about him wanting to be loved. To me, how much more love can you get if you go to that foreign country and everybody's against you? Now you become an American hero. You could just hear the USA chants like rising all over the place, not in the arena, but everywhere else. In every bar that's showing the fight. So I'm on board for that.
People think because I defend Jones more than the average person that he and I have some sort of friendship, which is
not best buds.
No, dude, I can. Yeah, I mean him at crab cakes, drinking Natty Bows, wearing purple camo. I don't. You have closer ties in terms of communication with Malky than I do. I don't have hardly any connection to the guy. I've interviewed him a couple times. That's it. But let's try the best we can to put ourselves in his perspective. If we're going to do the show and have a rematch with Gustafsson, which he knows is coming, I don't think he's going to fight on that level. How about making it mutually advantageous? In other words, I'm assuming Jones is going to say no, but like this, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. Like all the things you guys are saying are all true about how it would be great for us. Well, gee, what about Jones's? It's really about Chuck Mindenhall here, guys, and what he needs. But the truth is, I think it was right, and I do think it could solve some of the problems that he's had in his career. The question is whether or not Jones thinks those things are necessary to solve the problems in his career. The question is whether Jones even cares to try and solve those problems anymore. Maybe he's just going to say, I'm just going to be this way with fans. I'm going to do what I want. If you want me to fight in some guy's backyard, you better pay me. So, listen, if they want to hold the fight there, great. For all the reasons you talked about, to grow the European market, I can see why those parties would be interested. But if they're not going to make it advantageous in a special way for Jones, somehow, some way, monetarily or whatever the case may be, promise him 2 more fights in Baltimore in the future, whatever the case may be, then he has no incentive to do it. This idea that he has to do it because it's good for MMA and good for the UFC is true and also irrelevant.
Dana White said, when I asked him about this, what if Jon doesn't want to go there? He's like, oh, you don't get to decide where you want to go.
Apparently they're indentured servants now.
But, forgetting the fact that this is a guy who said, I don't want to fight Chael Sonnen on 8 days' notice, and they had to cancel the show. So Jon Jones will tell you what he wants to do, and sometimes the UFC has to listen. I want to ask you guys about Phil Davis, because leading up to that fight, he was talking a lot about Jon Jones, and he certainly did not deliver on Saturday night. But is there egg on Phil Davis's face? Because in my opinion,
cookies on his face. I don't think there's
crumbs, right?
Yeah, cookies.
In my opinion, he still brought attention to his fight. He wasn't talking about Rumble, but there was still some buzz there, and maybe heightened buzz because of what he was saying, and he was playing with Jones and all that stuff. Is there really egg on Davis's face, or at the end of the day, was he just answering, the call that Dana White was making? Amp it up a little bit. And he certainly did that. So I know some people were, including Jones, were kind of, mocking him and saying, you screwed up. You called him out, and look, you couldn't even beat the guy in front of you. But I actually thought, he did a good job, all things considered, except for Saturday night.
All right, well, it's only his, let's put it in some perspective. It's only his second career loss. He owns victories over Gustafsson and who else? Machida.
Let's use quotes on that.
So he's got wins over. He's got wins over the 2 guys who are going to be challenging for championships. I mean, he did not bring it on Saturday night. So, but I don't think we can just write him off. I think you're right. He raised his profile, and he didn't deliver in the cage. Now he's got the profile raised. He damn well better bring it in the cage next time against whoever he fights, and he's going to have to. impose his will. This is a guy he's a Division I NCAA national champion wrestler, and he couldn't take down a guy who was fighting as a welterweight not too long ago. He's got to fix that. He's got to he doesn't have to be an exciting fighter. He doesn't go out there and do spinning kicks. He just needs to be the best Phil Davis and just destroy somebody the next time he fights, and then all will be forgiven.
I thought that, I believe it was you, Luke, who brought it up in the scrum about the level of concern. Is Phil Davis sort of evolving? Is he like doing anything from where he was, when he came in? Has he been? That's really what stands out to me, is I just don't see big evolution in his game. His stand-up, you're not seeing a ton of it. I mean, he's using it sparingly. He wasn't able really to do much. He was forced to fight the stand-up fight, but he wasn't able to do anything with it. And it seemed like he had sort of a label that he didn't want to get hit in a fight. Like he did, if you were able to get him, Machida kind of got him a little bit in that fight. He took a big shot against Anthony Johnson. I don't know if that affected him early in the fight or made him more tentative to come in, things like that. But you felt like once it was established, that rhythm was established to the fight, that's where it was going to go. At least that's the way, that was my impression of the fight, just from everything that you'd watched of Phil Davis before that fight. You realize as soon as he wasn't able to get those initial takedowns and he was eating a couple of the shots, we were probably looking at this sort of fight the rest of the way. I didn't really have a thought that Davis was going to be able to turn it around at that point and win the fight. So to me, I'm like, there's something about that sort of telegraphed thing that it still hangs on Phil Davis. Is he going to evolve? Is he going to do something? Is he going to be able to do more than just, if the thing that he's very good at doesn't work, does he have something, does he have a plan B to get it done?
That ability to bounce back. I mean, that's the evolution that seems to have evaded him so far. And I mean, look at Johnny Hendricks in the fight with Lawler. He was going to lose that fight till the last couple minutes of the last round. He was getting beat up, and he found an extra gear to turn it around and win the fight. And we've seen other fights like that where someone, he just looks like he's just about to.
Jon Jones, Gustafsson.
Jon Jones against Gustafsson, great example. That midway through the fourth round, there's going to be a new champion. There's no question in anybody's mind. But Jones fought, in those championship rounds, as did Hendricks. Yeah. Now, of course, there were no championship rounds in the Davis fight. There was just a 3-rounder. So maybe it's unfair to judge him. But I just get the feeling from his demeanor that he isn't the guy that's going to turn it around. And maybe he needs to show us that he is. He needs to be a guy who fights through it. He did get hurt early in that fight. And how much of that was the way? How much did that affect the way he fought the rest of the way? Well, he needs to transcend that. He needs to be able to take that beating and come back and do something special, and that's what we need to see.
Is he the light heavyweight Michael Bisping? Not from his talking, but he'll always kind of be right there, never get that title shot.
He's there right now. I don't know if it's a permanent thing. I still am not ready to close the book on Phil Davis at all. I actually think the worst thing he could do is going back to what he was doing before. Now, winning is the most important thing, but I actually think doubling down on all the talk is the best way to go forward. And I know it's crazy coming out of me, but it's true, like Sonnen's act is, and that's what it is. It's an act. At this point, has sort of worn thin. But he can lose to people, and he lost in the Anderson Silva fight, and he just doubled it up right back. He went right back, and he picked fights he could win too. And always having a target to talk about, always finding a way to be relevant, even insulting the guy that just beat you. That's kind of what Phil Davis, if he wants to share that limelight, is going to have to do. He's not going to win on the style of his fighting. He may wind up getting the resume to get there, but I just feel like pick a fight with somebody. Pick a fight you think you can win. Do it as best you can, because he can actually talk really well. Yeah. And I thought it was kind of funny when he posed off with Johnson, and then they brought up Glover and Jones, and he stood in front of Jones. Ultimately, Jones was right that the guy was distracted, but it was his first time really practicing with the shtick. Maybe he gets better at the shtick too. So the worst thing he can do is go back to being boring, quote unquote boring, and then winning fights that people may or may not care about and not really saying anything. He's going to go right back to where he started from. That's not the way forward. The way forward is eat the loss, pretend it didn't happen, still be angry at the world, and pick fights as you go forward.
Guys, the other big news that broke late last week had nothing to do with UFC 172, but it was big for the UFC. They announced that Andrei Arlovski, the former UFC heavyweight champion, was coming back. He will be fighting Brendan Schaub at UFC 174 in June in Vancouver, BC. I did not see this coming. I did not see this coming, especially after the Rumble Johnson loss last year. I thought that was pretty much it for any hopes of Andrei Arlovski ever fighting back in the UFC. But here he is. He's fighting, and he's fighting in that division that needs some names, and in an organization that needs some names because they're doing so many shows. How surprised were you when you heard this news?
Shocked, man. I mean, talk about left field. And it was funny as hell, too, because we were in the post-fight scrum, and I think you asked him about it, about bringing Arlovski back. Like, why'd you do it? And he explained, he's like, yeah, well, his management team approached us. And then I asked him, have you seen his fights?
Yeah.
And he goes, no. I'm like, well, that explains it. Yeah. You know, listen, it's not to disparage Arlovski. I thought he was beneficial to the UFC when Pride had the best heavyweights. And the Buentello fight was not the most exciting thing in the world, but it was a guy that tried to market, and for a while, things worked out pretty well. I mean, the Sylvia fight's not so great. But he was valuable to them for a moment in time, and I don't think that should be overlooked. But Jesus, has the sun set on him? Listen, heavyweight is crazy, and MMA is crazy. It would not be at all wild for a guy who has pretty good takedown defense in Arlovski to beat Brendan Schaub. But even if he does that, it's just hard to see how he does anything much more than that. And if that's what he wants and is okay with, and commission sanction it, I guess that's the world we live in. But for me, this is just evidence of the fact that UFC 174 had a weak lineup, still kind of does. They need as many guys as possible. I mean, they're literally getting guys that can't win a World Series of Fighting. You know, talk about. I mean, I guess Ben Askren should have gone over there. You know, maybe lost a couple. They had to sign him. Say again?
He only had one loss at World Series.
Well, you know what I mean. He lost to a guy who's now fighting light heavyweight. I'm just.
He lost to a 170-pounder.
Yeah. All I'm saying in the end, all I'm saying is, listen, if he can get a couple of wins and get some money, good for him. You know, I can't disparage that, but this is not a signing of. They didn't do it because it was a meritocracy or a
It's more a statement on the UFC than Andrei Arlovski. He wanted to be back in the UFC, and they said yes.
They didn't even look at tape.
Well, maybe he didn't, but I'm sure Joe Silva knows what he's done.
But if there was some, I mean, there's not red flags on the tape. Like, I'm sure they told him this is not the same guy that we let, or that walked away in the end.
What do you think?
I mean, same here. Although the one thing I'll say is that we could have been sitting here not too long ago when Mark Hunt was being brought into the UFC, and he was on a ridiculous losing streak. And look what happened. They
were kind of forced to do that one, though. They had his contract. And he
sure. But in terms of the fighter, the guy they brought in was a guy that was just losing one after another, but he always had that punch. Now Arlovski is not a one punch knockout artist on that same level, but he has a pedigree, and they can always. You know, I get the feeling they just want to have somebody who Bruce Buffer could say, and former, heavyweight champion of the world, and that is something that just fills the arena for a few moments and reverberates, and they're happy with that. And they're not expecting this guy to be fighting Cain Velasquez anytime soon, hopefully. but as a guy does he have a place in the UFC? I guess in that division. Anything goes. If you're breathing,
that's just it. Is that division? The UFC rankings have 15 now. You know, they've moved it to 15, but there really are only like 20-something heavyweights on the roster at any given time. Pat Barry is just the fact that these guys there just aren't that many names, and I feel like that probably plays into it a little bit too. You've got a guy with a name; they can justify it because he has been at least on a little bit of a hot streak by these standards. He's won something like 5 out of 6 or something like that.
6 of 8 since that 4-fight losing streak where he was getting
1-1.
But he had that's what I was, it's crazy to me that we're sitting here talking about Andrei Arlovski because that 4-fight losing streak where he was knocked out 3 times, and at the time we were when Karatanov in the Grand Prix,
he was dead.
Yeah, we at that point we were like, Andrei Arlovski that's it for Andrei Arlovski.
Right.
Here we are a couple years later talking about him re-entering the UFC. It's just such a crapshoot, it feels like to me sometimes MMA, but I was with all you guys on that. I did not see that coming. I even tweeted afterwards that when's Tim Sylvia, or is Tim Sylvia going to be the next one? But at that point, it's no longer that out of the question.
Right, exactly. It's like it's a joke, but it's not. It could be the next guy they sign. Who knows?
This is what we're talking about. We had a discussion a few weeks ago. Jake Shields out of the UFC. Andrei Arlovski in the UFC. This is the proof that the fans want the majority of the top guys, but they just want some dudes to slug it out for them. That's really kind of what it's about.
And it's almost like every division has its own rules. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like if there was an Andrei Arlovski in the welterweight division, he probably wouldn't be back. But because it's the heavyweights, because he has that good look, because they needed that fight, he's back. Now this brings up an interesting thing with World Series of Fighting, who had to essentially release him from their contract because the contract had expired, but he still owed them a fight. He asked to be released. They said yes. And I think this sets a dangerous precedent for World Series of Fighting. Now, Josh Berkman went on Twitter a couple weeks ago and said, I want to be released. They said no. Gerald Harris, he says, I'm retired. They're not giving me what I want. All right, we'll see what happens there. And guys are kind of pushing World Series of Fighting because at the end of the day, no one wants to be fighting for World Series of Fighting. They want to be in the UFC. Maybe some want to be in Bellator, but their final destination is not World Series of Fighting. I can assure you, Justin Gaethje wants to be in the UFC, right. Nick Newell wants to be in the UFC, et cetera, et cetera. World Series of Fighting needs to, figure out their place. And then on Wednesday, their executive vice president, Ali Abdelaziz, comes out with this statement, and it doesn't paint him in the best light possible, right? I mean, no one's ever going to side with the promoter when they're telling, fighters, you need to step up, and if you don't step up, we're going to put you on the sidelines. Because remember, Bellator kind of did that, and people didn't like that at all. And now you find out that Rousimar Palhares is backing out of this fight against John Fitch because his mom is sick. I just feel like this is not a good stretch for World Series of Fighting, and especially with them going, these Twitter battles and whatnot. They need to figure out their place and their voice as well. And there might be too many cooks in the kitchen, too many voices. And it reminds me, honestly, of Elite XC when they had all these different voices coming out in the press and arguing with managers and setting these kind of these guidelines. How does World Series of Fighting fix this, or is this just who they are?
It's weird because the fight between the UFC and Bellator isn't a real fight. Which is to say, Bellator is number 2. That's fine. We can agree to that. It's a distant number 2, man. Like, this is not UFC versus Pride. This is not even close to UFC versus Strikeforce. They're a distant number 2. But for Bellator, their eyes are on the prize. That's who we're going to compete with. We're going to talk about our ratings next to them. We're going to talk about our roster next to them. We're going to talk about our trilogy. Everything is about how they compare to the UFC, even if it's a phony comparison. World Series of Fighting is just sort of floundering out there. They don't really have a foil. They don't have something that they can compare themselves to. They do decent ratings enough on NBC Sportsnet, and that's fine. And they've got some good fighters on there. And they put out some good fights. I mean, this is not a bad product, but they don't really have anything to position themselves against to measure their quality. And so as a consequence, it's just sort of white noise that passes through your ear canal. What they need to do is find an identity. They need to find, and I don't know that picking a battle with Bellator is going to work. The market share after UFC is so tiny. Bellator's got the next big chunk of it, and then everyone else is kind of fighting for scraps. So letting guys go is not a winning strategy, but I really don't know what the next obvious step is, except to say find a way to measure yourself against the standard and how you meet that. That's what Bellator's doing, even if it's not real.
And they shouldn't have brought on Jon Jones as a social media consultant. That was their first ill-advised. Right. He's a good fighter, but that other stuff. But yeah, I know I'm with you. They are in a strange position, and I guess that they get forgotten unless they make mistakes. That's sort of what happens. If they're doing the right thing, you don't even notice them. It's like the referee in a sport, or umpire in a baseball game. You don't notice them until they make a bad call. So I mean, I guess we're just maybe it's it's unfair to amplify those things. I mean, they did it, and that's what they're doing. But these are the kind of things that are going to come up. Fighters are going to pull out of fights. Fighters are going to aim for something higher, and you can't blame them, can you?
No, and it's unfortunate that this whole thing kind of came down like going into this year. There's supposed to be the big NBC. Some fights aired on that, and you got probably maybe their biggest fight with Justin Gaethje fighting, Nick Newell. That should be those types of things should be sort of getting the spotlight and not all this stuff. But to me, it's like you guys are talking about, it's just the identity. We've talked about it when they first were getting rolling. Should they just put these guys, should they just match up the best fighters, that sort of thing? And it seems like that's sort of what they're doing. They're not really building the farm behind them. They're not really doing anything, planting the seeds to keep it growing. It's just sort of like mixing, matching, losing the guy who, whatever, this guy's going back to you. It's just, to me, it's just a lot of confusion, but it seems more than anything, it just seems like an alternate place for fighters who aren't in the UFC to go and to still see those guys fight. For instance, if they put Jake Shields against John Fitch, well, it's still an interesting fight. A lot of people are going to want to watch that fight. At least we have a platform to watch it. That's just from a fan's perspective, but it seems like it's a sort of temporary way station for a lot of fighters at this point, either to kind of go one direction or the other.
Well, I think that's their. Go ahead.
I was going to say, a lot of people might want to watch Fitch against Shields, but if they're having on the same day or the same weekend as not just one UFC pay-per-view, but two UFC fight cards, now they're going to have this. I mean, I would love to see Fitch and Shields, but at a certain point, there's just like an overload. I mean, come on.
I think their biggest struggle is, who do they want to be? Do they want to be the gateway to the UFC and say, look, if you go to Bellator, you might have a hard time getting to the UFC, and you might be tainted because the UFC doesn't like, ex-Bellator guys, whatever. You could come to us and we'll let you go if you get that offer. Or do they stand their ground and say, these are your contract terms, you have to honor them, and we're not going to let you go? I think it was a mistake to let Andrei Arlovski go, because you set that precedent that the fighters are going to walk all over you. Oh, UFC comes calling, even with a worse deal, we want to leave. No, we had plans for you. We wanted you to be in this fight this summer. We want you to do this. Josh Berkman, you're going to go on Twitter and complain publicly. We're not just going to let you go. And I think the fighters right now are kind of, in some ways, trying to test them and see how far they can push their buttons. They need to stand their ground, or they just need to be forthright and say, all right, if the UFC comes, we'll let you go. There'll be an out clause in your contract. So
remember, they always position themselves as, because part of what the initial bump that World Series of Fighting got was post the Eddie Alvarez Bellator fiasco.
Right.
And they were all saying, well, listen, we don't treat fighters that way. We're fighter friendly. Okay, how fighter friendly are you? We're going to find out, because I guarantee you they're going to push the limits, and they're testing that. They're testing that real hard right now.
One last topic before we go. We didn't have a chance to talk about this because we were on hiatus, but Ronda Rousey's comments about Cris Cyborg were a very big talking point last week when she told Yahoo Sports that Cyborg has essentially turned into an it because of all the steroids that she has allegedly taken, and saying that her biggest concern was, if she leaves the women's division for whatever reason, what will happen to that division that she helped build up if Cyborg is kind of ruling and then bad things happen, suspensions, etc. That was her concern. And then, of course, on Thursday at the scrum, Dana White kind of reinforced her points and took some shots at her appearance, and it wasn't maybe the answer some of us were looking for, the response some of us were looking for, and perhaps some were looking for Ronda to be reprimanded. Who knows? We could get to that in a second. But how do you feel this has been handled or not handled by the UFC? At the end of the day, Cris Cyborg isn't a UFC fighter, and this is the fight game. Back in the day, Muhammad Ali called Joe Frazier and Uncle Tom. People are insulted in the fight game. Is this fair game, or was there a line crossed by both Ronda Rousey and Dana White?
Well, Joe Louis was always really hurt by what Muhammad Ali said. Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier was. I keep saying Joe Louis. Joe Frazier was really hurt by the things that he said. So that was a real sore spot for him.
But no one fined Muhammad Ali for that. No one was. No, you know what I mean?
No, I understand. But this is also a league. This is a new thing in combat sports, to be honest. I think UFC is they're half top rank, hands off, and then they're half, we're the NFL, look at our corporate responsibilities. So they can't quite ever figure out which one they are at any moment in time. I mean, listen, Dana White had good points. That's the reality situation. What if we sign this lady and she fails to make weight? What if, 'cause that was part of the issue too.
Sure.
What if we sign her and she pops positive before, when they do random testing, before the fight takes place? She is a liability. That's a serious problem. I take that as a legitimate criticism and a reason for not wanting to do business with
Absolutely.
her. Okay, but now we're going to comment on the contours of femininity and appearance? I mean, this is just gross, Please, that is totally gratuitous, unnecessary stuff. If they want to make a point about how we can't sign her and do business with her, I have absolutely zero argument against that. But if we're going to sort of tread into literally juvenile territory about how people look as women, I mean, it's stomach turning, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, not to vindicate Ronda Rousey on this, I think that what she did was insulting to all women, really. But Dana White ramped it up. This was an opportunity. This is what PR is all about. This was the opportunity for the promotion to try to tamp it down a little bit and say, oh well, and change the subject and distract us. Wave a little sharp object in front of all the media and let us, focus on something else.
Which I suspect Lorenzo would have done instead of Dana, but that's just neither here nor there.
But there's Dana White. He just throws. I'm going to throw a gallon of high test fuel on this fire. I mean, it's just
he was walking in the high heels.
Exactly. It was just really. It just took it to a whole other level, and to your point, I agree that she's been tainted by steroids. She's not the only. There are plenty of UFC fighters who are on the roster today that have been tainted by steroids. She's been tainted by there are doubts about her being able to make that weight, but there are fighters in the UFC where there's always a question until they get on the scale. I mean, I think, face it, they've got the face the face. I mean, literally the face of women's MMA going right now. And if Cyborg comes in and smashes Ronda Rousey, there go all the Maxim cover shoots and all that kind of stuff just goes away. They're not going to say it that way. They're going to sort of hint at it. Oh, you know, all that kind of stuff. But you know, it's just I think it's just so distasteful.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the whole thing has been very strange to me to hear Dana White. I think more than anything because Ronda Rousey, she's been sort of crass and saying certain things in the past. I think we're not going to get overly crazy. I know a lot of people gave her criticism for what she just did here. We talked about her the Sandy Hook things going back all the way. You know, there's been many things that Ronda Rousey has done, but I do feel like they sort of take it. It's almost a little bit too out in the open that they don't want Cyborg in the UFC. I mean, they're making it. They're just finding any reason, any inflammatory thing to bring at her, and they are legit. Obviously, she has popped for steroids, things like that. But to me, it's just you're crossing the line when you start to get into those sort of calling, you know, the it. Unless they're talking about the it factor that Dana White is.
I knew you were going to do that. I
told you in Baltimore. I was like,
Been waiting for this one all week. Been waiting for this.
But I mean, you're going. It's. Dana White has to understand that sometimes when one of his fighters does that, you don't go in and say, "Whoa, do you disagree?" and put it on, because obviously the media is disagreeing pretty heavily. If he doesn't read the internet, if he did, he would see that most people are disagreeing with that sort of thing, and it's dehumanizing.
It's pretty simple. Stick to the issue. What is the issue? The issue is about whether or not this person can do business with you because she has weight management issues or even weight possibility issues, however you want to characterize it. She has an issue with performance-enhancing drugs. What does her appearance have to do with anything? It is a gratuitous slam. It is completely perfunctory. Has nothing to do with whether or not this is a valuable fight to be made or whether it can be made. It is just juvenile.
It is a valuable fight because they tried to make the fight.
Yeah,
they tried to sign her. So
stick to the issues. What are the issues? Everything else is not essential.
I don't believe Cyborg deserves a pass because of her past. I mean, she did take steroids. She was popped for steroids. And you could talk about that all day long. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of mean. You know, it's bullying.
Kind of mean.
You know, of course, it's very mean.
It's like it goes from, listen, this is not a situation we can do business with, to I really hate this person. Ooh, and for reasons because she doesn't look feminine enough. Who says things like that?
Yeah, and let's be honest, Ronda has actually said worse than about Cyborg.
Right.
But the whole thing, you know, combined was just, you know, this was just a little too much. It was uncomfortable.
It was surreal watching in real time too.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
like, I didn't know what I was looking at.
Well, I hate to end on that note, kind of a bummer. But let me remind you that Glory is back on Spike TV this Saturday night. We want to thank them for their support. It is a great card, headlined by a 4-man, one-night heavyweight tournament and the Glory debut of former UFC fighter Pat Barry. There's also a welterweight title fight on the line. This man will be there. That man will be there. How about this?
That's right.
Jeff, we didn't get the invite.
Jeff will just walk by in the back.
Kudos on that. That was fantastic.
I'll be streaming Jazz Fest in New Orleans.
That was the highlight of my night. Great stuff by the panel. Now we want to hear from you, of course. Unfortunately, we won't be on next week. We'll be back the week after that, and I'm assuming we'll have a lot to talk about. Just a guess,
it might be.
Given the world that we cover, the beat that is mixed martial arts. For Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat. We'll see you next time.